Hey YouTube, welcome back to another week with me in the studio. My name's Charlotte and I'm a local Wiltshire artist. So on this week, I thought I'd take you through one of my prized possessions. This sketchbook I created in Canada. If you want to know more about how I ended up there, head to the story of my art videos earlier on my page. But this sketchbook means so much to me because it was the one thing from the sculpture projects that we were doing that I was able to bring home. I also have a couple of plaster pieces, but all the bigger pieces, they would not have fit in my suitcase. So this is the only thing physical that I have to remember them. So let me take you through it and let's see what I got up to while in Canada. So welcome to the Canton Mixed Media Extra Large Sketchbook. No, this is the sketchbook, as I said, that I bought in Canada and that I completed as part of the Introduction to Sculpture module that I took. So I was over there for 3-4 months and the facilities at the University of Canada was absolutely fantastic. They had a wood workshop and a metal workshop that were absolutely massive, fully packed with everything that you would need, and you could pretty much, once you're trained up in them, access them as and when you wanted to, when there were staff on hand for any other additional things you may need. So I haven't looked at this in quite a while, so it might take me a second to remember exactly what we did. So this was a little note that I had from they call them over there professors, and I got an A+ when I was there. Charlotte, wishing you a safe and interesting and satisfying return to the UK. Thank you for your intelligent and enthusiastic contributions to this course. Your work in sculpture and drawing is, without exception, very high quality and reflects your vigorous experimental approach. So the first thing we did was work in plaster. So we had an introduction using leaf casts, and we got our clay, pressed it all down, pressed our object into it, and added soapy water to prevent any objects from sticking that we had in. Ours, in our example, was a leaf, and then you took it off and added plaster. So you start thin with your plaster to get all those details, shake it, give it a little tap around so it really gets in those cracks. And then you start to pour a little thicker on top to get those layers. We were then challenged to produce plaster heads. So underneath here is the layout of a head. And I wanted to push myself out of the bounds a little bit, adding something on. So we had our artist research. I looked at Mariko Mori and swells, colours, a little bit alien-like almost. I had a pot. It was one of my favourite pots when I was over there, and it had this gorgeous French label, chocolate label on it. And it'd be one of those pop lids, so you'd have to like hook on top and down, if that makes sense. So I drew those out in different ways that I could use it to display. I really enjoyed looking at Tony Smith, who was a large-scale sculpture artist, quite angular, and also a sense of vulnerability within it all. And then this is the cheesecloth that we used to sort of harden things up. It's quite soft now. Continuing the idea of adding kind of horns, extra shapes. I believe I use this sort of shape within. Trying to get something different. Almost is about half and half of it. Looks normal, isn't quite though. Got old Andy Goldsworthy as well, reusing recycling from nature, and this sort of spiral work on the previous page. I then ended up finding, so when I was over there in Canada, they had a couple of free stores around the university, and this meant you could literally walk in, find what you wanted, and literally just walk out with it. And it meant that there was no barriers for students to get what they wanted. So I found that pot there, and I think it was either in one of those or we're digging around, we found some old maps, World in 1965, and they were very American because America was in the centre and it was huge, and I wanted to play around with where perhaps we came from, the change in humanity, change in environment, evolution, life cycle, alien versus human. So from here I kind of had my basis idea on the shape of the head, so I wanted to see what different layers of maps would do to this. So through each layer here, so 1, 2, how far to the extreme could I take it? How much could I push this layering and effects on the face itself? And how I could orientate it and layer it with other elements and make it flow around the head. I also started adding the wire. Here's the pot, and the wire would come out from the wire pieces on the pot to really bring it together rather than just a head floating. So after our heads, we looked at Alginate, and Alginate is a very, very fun thing to work with. I've used it before on hands, so again, if you watch the history of my artwork and my journey, you'll recognise this sculpture. So I did a hands piece where my hands were like this, and it was the same kind of elements through, but this time I decided to do my foot, and I've actually got this here in my studio. So these are the different, this is a process, and then going through, because you can cast everything down to ears, noses. Obviously I did my feet, I've done my hands. Similar to our leaf casting at the very beginning, we looked at relief moulds of where we would roll out a nice big slab, shown here, and then we would build up a wall around it after we've pressed a load of objects into here, and then pour plaster in, and that wall there just meant that if any plaster overflowed, it would be fine, it would be caught. So I chose to do to use some of these leaves. So these leaves were actually pressed into clay. You can see the clay sort of all in here, the dirty kind of look on them. Branches, little ghosty things, because we were coming up to Halloween, so I wanted a little bit of a fall or ghosty variation of it. And then this was actually a detailed drawing of how that mould came out. I also learned that you could clean plaster with a toothbrush, just underwater. So that was something that I found quite useful. We then looked at a two-part mould. So again, these are the instructions that I followed and the process that I did. And I decided to do, what was it, gourd? There were so many over there. I was absolutely amazed. And of course, again, it was Halloween time, so there were plenty out. And this is actually some of the Alginate that I had with me, and it's not soft like you think it would be. It is really, like, I can't really press down into that. I'm feeling all the resistance. But the 2-part mould is where you have your object, you have your mould over it, and then you have a silicone mould over your object, and then a plaster mould over that to keep it all tight in. And you can have either 4-part, you can do a 3-part, or as I did, half and half, a 2-part mould. So here we go. Here's my object was in here. This pink bit, light pink bit here, is the alginate mould, and then a plaster mould holding it all together. So I split my sketchbook half and half, so that was all our plaster project. And then we looked at wood and metal. So as I said before, there was specific areas that we could go to. So there was a metal workshop, and there was a dedicated wood workshop as well, which I found absolutely fantastic because we're struggling to get those back at home. So the aim was to take a piece of furniture and create an animal, or create part of an animal. So the first thing we looked at was a couple of artists, so Ai Weiwei being one of them, and Carsten Holder as well. So we looked at all the common wood joints, how we might take our furniture and piece it together. And for me, I had 4 little chairs. Was it 4? No, 2 little chairs. So they were originally children's chairs that I bought off of, it wasn't Facebook, but it was definitely something else. And then we did MIG welding. So I was incredibly lucky earlier in my relationship with my now husband, excuse me, that he actually taught me how to MIG weld. So I already know the process, but I just wanted a little bit of a top up, and obviously had to learn all of the safety precautions of the metal workshop in Canada. This admittedly is one of my favourite pages, and you can probably see why. I was torn between humans and animals. I've always been drawn more to humans when creating. So child, bone structure, kind of thinking about what I could do. Again, a few artist studies as well, just dotted around, incorporated into the page. However, for me, I was kind of drawn towards maybe doing an animal, doing something different while I was there. So had frogs with the interesting angles, our deep sea cuttlefish, but it did have complicated curves. But then I was drawn turtles, tortoises, their shells. So I started to look at studies on them. And again, I am so happy with this page. So I started planning on what kind of cuts of wood I might need, turning it into an angular piece that I could possibly follow, as well as looking at the underside of the belly. And of course, if you're going to look at animals, got to do a little study on the different areas. An alternative way here, stepping through instead of creating individual blocks, as in this one. So I had the wood down, but what was I going to do with metal? Because this is a wood and metal project. So I had a couple of ideas of continuing the geometric design, so having wood and metal to create the shell, to create part of a shell, or to open up the space. The second option was that I would create the shell in wood and then use the metal to show the hidden layers of nerves within the shell. And thirdly, in this corner, to create a net pattern of being trapped, for that is the state of many of them, unfortunately. Not sure what happened there, but apparently I was planning. And again, looking into the different patterns of wood. So what I ended up doing is something that looked very much like that, obviously in brown, not in grey. However, the metal was in that grey tone. And I ended up doing part of a sculpture. So if I read it here. The sculpture is carefully balanced on both the edge of the wood and the metal. The size and shape of the existing shell hints at the overall size of the shell. It also allows you to see the inside, which is normally hidden. A juxtaposition between the wood and the metal, it also makes sense when trying to see through it. I did make a note that I would have liked to have done more of the shell to give a better gesture of the shape. However, I enjoyed how it came out. And it was also purely because of time. We didn't have too long. I never continued this sketchbook. I have about 2/3 of it left here. But with such dear memories that it holds throughout, I feel like I won't be able to do it justice. And this is some of my most favourite work that I created. Yes, I spent a while on it, but I enjoyed it. It came through kind of naturally to me, and it made me think that, should I have done some of my own stuff this way? This sketchbook still inspires me to this day to continue in different mediums. So I got watercolour, pencil, pen, graphite, coloured pencil. And it's kept in a special place in my studio. Obviously, from England to Canada is quite a flight. I went to the University of Ottawa. Lovely, lovely people there. And I was lucky enough to bring some of my smaller works home. So I actually brought all of my photography work home. I did over there, and I bought, as I say, some of the smaller sculpture pieces. Thank you for coming with me and looking through that sketchbook, having a trip down memory lane. It was quite inspiring to see it again for myself, so I hope that I also inspired some of you to get that sketchbook out and to have a little experiment with it. Canada always brings back really good memories for me, as I actually met one of my great friends over there who actually lives in Australia. And it was so full of amazing memories. I met so many fantastic people over there, and if I could have stayed and done the course, I feel like I would have. It's definitely something to explore if you're able to go abroad and study, whether it's part of the term or for a year, then I would definitely say give it that chance. But anyhow, I'm going to head off and do some more creating and hopefully get some of my projects done that I mentioned last week, 2 weeks ago now, as a couple of them are still on the table. However, if you enjoyed this video, give it a like and give me a subscribe to see more in the future. Thanks! Bye!